This is NDTV, and you're watching Classics.
Welcome to this special show on our spanking new channel, NDTV Profit, and we have a very special guest for you, the Ambassador of the United States to India, Dr. David Mulford. Thank you so much. And let me just start by looking at some of the economic environment that is surrounding us. How do you see the overall economic relations between India and the US? How do you see them poised at the present moment?
Well, I think overall India-U.S. relations can be summed up very simply in a sentence or two, namely that they're running at an all-time high, and we expect them to get better.
All-time high, but then they have also been coming off levels that aren't necessarily the greatest to start with. There's been this prolonged period of, if not actual hostility, but certainly a certain degree of indifference. And I know that's been one of the priorities of both the governments over the last 5 or 6 years. How do we repair that? Is that process still on track?
Well, I think you're right. I think there's a long history of uncertainty and up and down relations, a certain amount of suspicion on both sides, going back really for many, many years. But my own view is that during the 1990s, after the end of the Cold War, India itself went through a self-reflective process to determine what it thought its own role and position in the world should be. And it has come out of that with a very different impression and vision for its future, which is that it wants to join the world economy. It's aiming to become a regional power, a global power, and it has decided in the course of that it wants and it needs a key strategic relationship with the United States. And that really has been, I think, an important beginning point in the process. Now, that was interrupted in a negative way in the late 1990s with the nuclear developments here, which brought about sanctions and set relations back in a way. But when they were lifted in 2001, the sort of relationship took shape again and has moved very, very quickly in the last 2 years especially to become really a major relationship for the United States with a prospect down the road for that to be continuing. And I think for many advantages for both countries in both the economic and political fields.
Right, but having said that, has the United States also changed the way that it actually views India? And again, coming back to those nuclear tests, did those tests force the United States to reevaluate India completely? I think Stope Talbot was the person who said that sometimes the urgent crowds out the merely important. Did India rise from being just important to being urgent after the nuclear test? And did that force a reevaluation within the United States?
Well, obviously, I think it has. I mean, the nuclear development presented a certain reality. The United States has had to recognize that and deal with it, and it is doing so, has done so, and will continue to do so.
How does the United States view India? I'm looking at it from the broader point of view. In the past, India was quite often viewed as an irritation. In the mid-1960s, it was a basket case that sometimes needed to be bailed out with PL 488 and things like that. In 1971, we almost came to, it wasn't quite a shooting war, but the threat perhaps was held out there. Where exactly does the United States view India now on the global stage?
Well, I think the past is the past, and I don't think one needs to go into that in detail. I think the present situation is that President Bush, when he came into office, in line with his previous pronouncement that he would redefine strategic relationships of the United States to identify those relationships that were key in a long-term sense to the United States' future, instead of the U.S. simply responding to particular things that might pop up. And the national security study, which was done early in his administration, identified the U.S.-India relationship as one of the key strategic relationships of the United States. He has picked that up and developed that, and in coordination with Prime Minister Vajpayee, declared that together, first of all, and secondly, in January of 2004, they launched the so-called Next Step Strategic Initiative, which was an initiative aimed at capturing this aspect, what I call the sort of cornerstone of the strategic relationship, and there began a process which was, as you know, reached its first phase closure in September. That has been a very significant exercise for a number of reasons, both symbolically and practically speaking, and has important implications for the future in civil nuclear, civil space, high-tech commerce, and missile defense technology. But that is really only the cornerstone of the relationship. What I like to think about is what I call the comprehensive relationship, which is the overall relationship in all fields between the United States and India, including the bottom-up relationship that's clearly building between our peoples in the form of 80,000 Indian students in the United States, 2 million Indians becoming citizens in the United States, movement back and forth, a sort of growth of relationships that's very comprehensive and very powerful as a factor.
Right, but is the US right now viewing India in the way, for example, some of these reports do that come the next 20, 30 years, this is going to be one of the biggest players on the world stage. The United States' relations with India are important. And if that is the way the US is viewing India, why, for example, has President Bush not come yet? I mean, I think that's some of the criticism which even John Kerry had leveled during the election campaign.
Well, I think that's not a particularly on-the-mark criticism. I think that, yes, this is one of the key relationships. And yes, over the next 10, 20, 30 years, whatever that's going to be, in my opinion, this will be a major relationship for the United States. We are in the early stages of this really huge expansion that's been taking place. I would sort of say in the last 2 years, basically. President Bush has said that he is wanting to come to India. And I think he's told the Prime Minister, according to what the Prime Minister's told me, that he hopes to come within the course of this year. No commitment has been made, no formal dates have been set, but I think the intention is to come as soon as he can.
Right. Just viewing at some of the possible irritants, I think, which you could still have around. Firstly, in the economic sphere, there are times in India and the US are on opposite sides of the table when it comes to WTO and issues like that. Is that a big problem? And also, this entire outsourcing, offshoring, which has been there for the last year and a half. Do you view that as something which is pretty much behind us now that President Bush has been re-elected?
Well, outsourcing, I think, is calmed down and will stay in a calm state. And I don't know if it's exactly behind us. It's still an issue of sorts, but it's simply not a primary issue as it was during the course of the Democratic primary campaign period. WTO, I think we're on the same side there in the sense that we're both seeking a rule-based trading system. We have different points of view, but we are very much on the same side of the big picture issue and the general initiative of WTO. What I'd like to do is sort of distinguish between what I call the areas of common interest, which are very, very significant in a whole variety of areas, and in the economic field, they're very, very important. And what I call the sort of other level of irritants, and there are a very significant number of those, which we work away on all the time. But they are sort of micro issues, micro irritants, legacy issues left over from the past. Daybol is one of them. Non-payments in Tamil Nadu in the power sector, difficulties in the Orissa AES situation, tax issues of one kind or another,
all right.
Fertilizer subsidies. I mean, you can go down a long list of these things.
All right. We will, in fact, just take a look at some of those issues that you were talking about, Enron and Double in particular, other issues as like that, and maybe some of the other irritants as well. We'll do that in just a couple of minutes. We'll be back in just a minute. We have with us the American ambassador to India.